classes came in and said, he asked a lot of very pointed questions on how to set up businesses, how to do this and that and the other thing, analyze business performance from a microeconomic perspective. And I finally asked him what business he was in, and he was in the extracts. And I said, how big is that, is the cannabis industry? And he goes, I don't know, you're the economist, you tell me. So I decided to go out and take a look at the market as a whole in Oregon. I reached out to some folks in Colorado, talked to their state economists out there. And what I realized is that there's very, very little data right now on this market. And so I just set out to compile the data, publish it out, and create a baseline that everybody could look at and build upon. Okay, so this is the Herbonomics update. Okay, so on the national level, I've calculated the market at about $45 billion. So this is a huge market opportunity, and people like Cliff Robinson and others are gonna jump into this and capitalize on it. And I always like to draw comparisons on how big is a $45 billion market, and it's actually 5 times larger than the NFL. It's larger than all the wine sales in a given year in the U.S., and it's roughly the same size as all the chicken that's sold in the United States, or all the potato chips and crackers. And so it's phenomenal. One thing I was looking at, that's a lot of chicken. So I also looked just recently at all of the pizza that's sold in the United States. It's $37 billion. So cannabis is actually bigger than all the pizza.
That goes together.
And so there is a synergistic relationship between pizza sales and cannabis sales, and potato chip sales for that matter. But then I also looked at, what's the economy, what's the size of an economy of a nation? And how does $45 billion compare to the total output of a country, And so there's countries like Lebanon or Panama, Iceland, Afghanistan, and they don't even come close to that $45 billion figure. And so this is a huge industry, it's a huge opportunity, and so we're really pioneers in this field right now. And if you think about it, the industry's evolved, substantially over the last couple of years, and so that's why there's people like me presenting to people like you. Who would have thought 2 or 3 years ago that you'd have some geeky economist up in front of you talking about cannabis? All right, so I thought I'd talk a little bit about Washington as well. Last year there was $129 million of taxes collected. That's a substantial amount, and of course governments like taxes, and so they want more and more and more. But at some point when you have a high amount of taxes, and I'll go into this in just a little bit, it's actually detrimental because it suppresses demand rather than promote demand. But that $129 million is based upon $405 million in sales. The gross margin overall is about 33%. Now, gross margin is really what the money is, right? That's the money. But that gross margin, as Brian mentioned, that's actually going down. It was very high at the beginning of the year, and then in October and November, it was only 3%, and then it spiked back up in December. So, and what coincidentally happened in October and November, in Oregon, that might have impacted gross margins. Well, of course, it was the flower sales that started here in Oregon. So it drew a lot of the business away from Washington and brought it into Oregon.
So is that just retail sales, or does that take into account production, processing as well?
That's all production and processing as well.
That's all added.
Yeah, so in Washington, it started off at the beginning, we had 25, 25, 25 tax, producer, processor, and then it got moved in July.
I'm just curious about these numbers, if that's just taking.
Yeah, that's annual, so that's both.
That's processing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all.
I'm one of those number geeks.
Yeah.
Oh, cool, excellent.
Okay.
And, you know, the regulatory market is a little bit more mature in Washington, but it still has a long way to go. You know, there's residency, there's all sorts of other things, and so I can talk about that for days as well. They're proposed to kick in another 222 retail outlets, and I'm working with Frontrunner and with Dave to put together a white paper on that to say, you know, is 222 a good number of additional outlets, or is it a bad number, or what? And so I'll tease that now so that you guys can come to a seminar later on. All right, so yeah, so that's kind of a very brief Washington update. A little bit about Oregon. Demand forecast I put together and have been reaffirmed is it's about $600 to $700 million a year. That's from top to bottom. That's pretty substantial, and that's why I'm standing here today, is because that student in my class, you know, forced me to take a look at this, and I did, and I was blown away. I mean, there's a huge opportunity just in this state alone. In January, the sales tax that was accumulated was 3.4 million, 3.5 million. But I'm forecasting about 90 million in taxes per year once the market matures and you get oils and extracts and edibles once they come online. The regulatory environment, I'm sure that you guys understand this, is really dynamic right now. It's really tough to operate with confidence because you don't know what the rules are. And the rules change every day, it seems. So we're not quite as far ahead as they are in Colorado or in Washington. But that's going to change. I think it'll settle out in about, well, 12 to 18 months maybe, or something. Make my life a lot easier. Okay, so tax comparison. A little bit of an eye chart here, but what I wanted to convey here is that Washington, Oregon, Colorado have existing tax structures, but there's a couple of states that have recreational on their ballot in November, and I just wanted to draw a comparison between those. But by far, Washington state has the highest tax in the country on this, 37%, and then there's another 9% on top of that for a sales tax on the average. So that really is that's a tough hurdle to overcome when you're trying to address the black market. And I'll talk to that in just a little bit. Colorado has a blended tax rate. It's about 25 to 30%, slightly higher than Oregon. Oregon will eventually go down at the end of the year once recreational comes online. It'll go from 25% down to 17%. And so that's
Well, isn't it also the way they set it up, the local municipalities can add on top of that? So
yeah, they can add on to that a total maximum of 3% if they choose.
right.
But when I did the analysis of this and proposed the tax rates in the state of Oregon, I said, hey, these consumers are very price sensitive. So the more you jack up on those taxes, I know you want to go to the well, but don't do it because it's going to snuff out the demand. All right, so, and you know, when there's differences between bordering states, consumers will travel. So when there's a difference between the tax rate in Washington at 37%, here at 25%, eventually 17%, there's going to be an increase in business, Canna-tourism, as it's called. There's going to be Canna-tourism in Washington unless there's some type of parity between the prices. And then one other notable item is that in the eastern states and in California, the tax rate that's being proposed is right around between 10 and 15%. So there's this convergence of these numbers, and that's a good thing because then people will not have to travel to their other state because of the cheaper prices. Now, when Oregon started selling flour, there wasn't any tax on it, and it really impacted sales in Washington. And so this was published by a friend of mine down at the state capitol here in Oregon. He got some data from the Washington Liquor Board. And it shows that in the red there, it shows that how much business went down in October, or Croptober. How much business went down once Oregon came online. And that's pretty significant. In fact, there was another data point that said that 12% of the total cannabis revenue came from the bordering retail outlets bordering Washington, Oregon. 12% total revenue in the state. And then when Oregon went online, it went down from 12% to 7% of the total revenue. So a significant amount of that revenue was being driven by Oregonians because they could go over, buy it at the dispensary and bring it back. The same thing's going to happen when earlier oil and edible sales come online here in Oregon. You'll see a decrease in sales in the border retail outlets in Washington. And so, a little bit about the future. I could talk about this for hours. I just wanted to pull a couple of slides out, but look for our white paper that we're publishing. I just published one for Oregon. There was a team of 4 researchers, and we put together an Oregon retail outlet. It's an Oregon Cannabis Jobs Report. But I'm putting one together and teaming up with MJBA and Front Runner for Washington, and that one's looking good as well. And then, cannabis legislation, it's in its infancy, but it's still looking good. Look for banking reforms and taxation reforms. I think that's on a national level, that's where things will settle. Canada and Mexico are looking at legalization, some form or another. Mexico just announced medical. Mexico announced medical. Canada is looking to do a full recreational legalization in 2017. And the legalization is gaining traction. I was down working with some folks on the California campaign. 56% of the population is in favor of the bill that they've proposed to be voted on in November. So that's really good out of the gate. There's a lot of support for that. So lots of momentum, lots of opportunity. Just hopefully the legislatures will get it right, not have too much onerous taxes or over-regulation. So at that point, that's just a quick summary. I hope you enjoyed it. So if there's any questions, just let me know.
So those other states that are kind of looking for legalization pretty soon, they have dramatically lower initial taxation rates. Do you think that's because they're realizing they're kind of starting that taxation reform from the get-go rather than having it be too high and realizing later on it's kind of damaging the economic impact that cannabis sales are having?
Yeah, I think they're doing a couple things. They're dabbling their toe in the water on taxation, but they're also trying to compel the transformation of the consumer from the black market to the open market. And if you can get the price as close to the black market as possible, then there's a greater incentive to convert from the black market and do things legally. And so I think that's part of the motivation on those lower taxes. And we've seen it in states where there's been high taxes, or the black markets continue to flourish, and then they've had to slowly draw their taxes down. Good question.
Do you think the price per gram is going to continue to drop, like we've seen?
Yeah, and part of my analysis in Washington, there's going to be a commoditization of the prices, and you saw it in Brian's data. The same thing's going to happen here. Prices are relatively high, on an average, I think, around $10 a gram, and I think as more and more growers come online into the recreational space, it will drive the price down. That will impact 2 things. It'll be great for the people that want to buy, right? So they have lower prices, but it'll also try to drive out the bad actors and get that, once again, that parity between the open market and the black market. Any other questions? All right. Oh, what if there's another one?
Do you think, in your opinion, that like Washington, everything as far as dry flower is prepackaged, and like Oregon, it's not, or even when it goes toward recreational, it's not going to be prepackaged? Do you think that sensory experience actually helps to decline the sales in Washington when they come and have that sensory experience here, which they can't get there?
Well, I think, and there's been studies or surveys that have been now that are starting to come online. It says one of the biggest motivations on a purchase is price, but then it's followed up by your bud tender experience as well. So not sure if it's the tactile, you know, odoriferous nature of the.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to suggest there's not one market. What you're really going to see is there's multiple markets. There's the long time pot user, the black market consumer who for decades has been purchasing. That's a price sensitivity. You're seeing the medical patients who are used to touching the bud, they're used to that experience, but you're seeing really what's driving a lot of sales, and we're arguing this in terms of how many retail stores will need, is that there's a whole new crop of consumers, both medical and recreational and old pot smokers, who have never been in a dispensary, who have not been regular consumers, and are actually driven by the packaging. The first experience is they come in and they see products that were never available before, tinctures and confections and savories, and so you're seeing a price differential around those premium products. At the same time, you're seeing a race to the bottom for the swag, right, for the $99 ounces, and there's kind of those two markets, right? So the connoisseur is never buying that $99 because it's outdoor and it's not very good. The patient is going to increasingly spend more money because they're interested in understanding potency, understanding pesticides, and increasingly not using flour. Because as we move into a purely regulated medical scenario, that's non-smokables, that's edibles and topicals and tinctures and medicines. And so you're seeing those things will be driven by brand and packaging, just like Big Pharma is. You'll have no idea what this thing is until you get the market. But the flower itself, you know, that's the old school pot connoisseurs who still want to touch and smell. For a whole new generation, it's oil. You're not touching and smelling that at all. It's candies, it's edibles, and that's all packaging and promotion.
It'll turn into a brand thing. Absolutely.
If and when, regarding Oregon, do you see the wholesale price of flour going below the cost of production?
The wholesale price going down the cost of production.
Going under the cost of production, so it literally is not economically favorable to grow because it's been a race to the bottom and it costs more to produce than what you get on the open market.
Yeah, you know, that's,
Legal market.
I don't know, I don't have the timing on that, but I know it will happen in the sense that the people that can scale and drive their costs out will be the winners. And right now, the regulatory structure is trying to protect that from happening by limiting your canopy space and by limiting the amount of licenses that you can have on a given property, for example. And so by having a limited canopy space, you can't scale, you can't drive the price down as much as you would need to get to the point that you're talking about.
You know, down in Washington, our top guys are doing that on purpose. You take our number one processor doing 1.5 million a month, and he's losing money, but he's got Taj Mahal of all facilities. So I mean, it's just how he played.
And you saw that in Colorado, where there is not a lack of canopy. You saw the big players come in and they were selling wholesale pounds at, you know, under 500 trim at under $100 a pound. You can't grow it for that.
That's because they're funded well enough that they can endure that?
Because they're looking for market share.
There's
It's
funded
the
well enough
notion,
that
yeah,
they
it's the
can
notion
take a
of, at a certain point I say, okay, I'm rolling in with you. And that's what happens, right? Look at any American industry. It all rolls up, and usually that's by distribution and not production, right? McDonald's controls potatoes and beef and you know and other commodity sales because they're the big purchasers. The big chains, the number one consumer and who's setting the stage on organics is Walmart. Right, because they have the buying power. And so they literally set the market, and the little guys, drugstores, I mean, I could go on and on. Every industry eventually does that at a certain maturity. This one, because of federal prohibition, and that's really what I started off by saying, is you have an opportunity now. It's a finite opportunity. It may be a year, right? I mean, on Sunday, the president is speaking on CNN, apparently is calling for decriminalization and rescheduling, not descheduling, right? But that will open the door, right? And if we get a Democratic president, we will have the end of federal prohibition as we know it. And your opportunity will just get